very good evening to everyone. And as you all know, that Policy Times had given us an opportunity to create awareness in educational ventures. It has also given us a platform from where we can also revisit our emotions through poetry and literary discussions. Keeping this in mind, we are going to have an episode of reading poetry with an eminent poet who has been writing for quite some time and has been getting recognized for her variant styles and representations. She's none other than our very favorite and revered Dr. Zinia Mitra. Before letting her take the platform, we would like to give an introduction of the poet. Zinia Mitra is an associate professor and a director of Center for Women Studies, University of North Bengal. Her poems have been widely published in national and international journals, including News India, Ruminations, Contemporary Literary Review, Kavya Bharati, East Literature, Indian Literature, that is Sahitya Academy, Asian Signature, Tista Review, Setu, Poetry Portion. Her translations have been widely published in books, journals, including Indian Literature, Sahitya Academy. And her poems and books are like Indian Poetry in English Critical Essays, Poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, Imagery and Experiential Identity, 20th Century British Literature, Reconstructing Literary Sensibility, and Concept of Motherhood in India, Myths, Theories, and Realities. She has also been on the editorial board of Tista Review, an international journal of poetry, and has also edited a special issue on Yeats for Bold Line Magazine, Volume 1, Number 3, 2015. She has been teaching English for quite some time in Department of English, Bhattar College, Dantan, and then she has moved on to the University of North Bengal. Zinia Mitra, or very lovingly as Zinia Di is known to us, has not only been a very notable writer, but she has also excelled in writing poetry. So, since we have with us the poet herself, we will go and have some candid questions with her. Zinia Di, are you there with the mic?
Yes, I think, am I audible?
Yes, you are, absolutely.
Thank you.
The very first question which pops in our mind, that you have had such a glorious and an academic career, which really requires a lot of time and energy and consuming so much of hard work. Yet, it is very interesting that you find so much of time and to write poetry, which is itself, as Coleridge would say, best words in best order. So whatever be your ruminations, will you please share that when did you really start writing? I mean, when it came to your mind that apart from your academic exercises, you could also venture into this world of poetry? Please, Didi.
Okay, good evening, Monami Nag. First of all, a very good evening to you and Policy Times. Thank you, Monami Nag, for the detailed and generous introduction. I must say, I do not know whether I deserve all that. And I should thank you for having me for this interview. I really feel honored. And I feel exultant when someone addresses me as a poet, for all its fallen state, if we may so call. It is still a term that qualifies one for a special, imaginative power. By poet, I mean an inclusive term, of course. I include all those who have thought poetry but have never written down a single word. I was that kind of poet myself. I have written many poets in my mind. I put down my first words on page after years of writing poetry in my mind. And I love teaching. I'm most comfortable with my students, with research scholars, not the very serious ones, not the very studious ones, but the ones bursting with ideas, asking strange questions, taking arguments to the impossible end. As you also introduced me as a teacher, I would like to say that I began my teaching career in Mabut High School, Siliguri. I was a college student then, and we did not have a semester system back then. So it was annual examination system, part one, part two. So we would have long holidays, and I had hated, staying back home. Back then, we really had nothing to do at home. My mother scarcely needed any help. She's a great cook. We helped her only with making dishes when the guests arrived, with no Netflix, only Friday Chitrahar and serials like Taro Parboon. And of course, we would wait for Prannoy Roy's The World This Week. So I applied in a school that was close to my college and I got the job. And I would teach class 2, class 4. I would teach English and geography. I taught little children, and that was my best teaching experience. Then I went to Shukanto Mahavidyalaya as a substantive teacher. I was a TIC in Nakshalbari College. And now I'm in University of North Bengal and also the director of Center for Women's Studies. Now, it is very difficult to answer the question, when did I begin writing poetry, or like, how do I find time out to write poetry? Because, I feel poetry has been there since my childhood. The trees, the birds, the green grass, it was there with me. Yes, Monami. So
Okay.
it's there. Like, I don't have to make an extra effort to write poetry. It is there with me. So sometimes I just grab a pen. I'm not very conscious poet. I grab a pen and paper, and when the poetry comes to me, kind of, I write it down. Sometimes, yes.
So, as we all know about the popular definition of poetry as being the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So, for any poet who is really true to his or her instincts and habitats, poetry really does not require any kind of extra effort. Very true, Zinyadi, very true. Uh, Coming to the type of poetry that you write, I have read some of your poems. They are really imbued with the images of nature, and not only nature, you've always also given a kind of oriental philosophy to it, where you find Buddhas transform into trees, or the vice versa. This is something not only very interesting but very intriguing, that we can how we can uh, compare and coalesce the ideas of oriental ideas along with our nature ideas of nature. Is there any kind of particular form of poetry or theme that you really adhere to? Is there any kind of
Well, well, Monami, as I said, the poetry stayed with me since childhood. I was talking of trees, birds, green grass, and the Ganga, especially rivers. They had their special appeal. Now, poetry, I will say, grew up with me, or rather, I grew up with poetry. And then one day, I wrote down my first poem. I was in school. I would read out poems to my sister, and then in high school to my friends, in college again to my friends. My first poetry, so as to say, if I think back, since this is a conversation, it was first published in poetry.com and then in News India in 2011. It's titled the poem that pricks me with a rose thorn. It was published in News India. And before that, in social platform, it was published in, my poetry was published in poetry.com. That was a poetry platform then, poetry forum back then in 2004, 5. I think I'm talking of 4, 5. And now you were asking about poetic forms. Now there are hundreds of poetic forms, but I've never, I never begin writing poetry with a particular form in mind. I don't like my poems to be in chains. I mean, within a particular form. I've never written a sonnet, though I have tried a haiku, one or two. My poems are basically lyric poems. Some poems have internal rhymes, some have end rhymes, some are shorter, some longer, but never very long. This, however, does not mean that I'll never write a sonnet or an echo verse or any other form. I might in future. I will say it requires a great dexterity, to cast all the thoughts that emerge after, that emerge once it emerges, to cast it into a pre-decided form. So that is a challenge. And as far as you talk about nature, how nature occurs in my poetry, because I'm so located in a place, like when I write from my location. So I think, and nature has its own influence, I think, on everyone. So that is how it merges in the poetry. I think that is how it recurs in my poetry.
Very truly so. Having been situated in a place which is really picturesque and is one of the most beautiful places of India,
Mhm.
nature should come as is to you. Didi, I would like to remind you of your poem, The Whale, which was published in Sahitya Academy Journal,
Mhm.
and it was highly praised. Would
Yes.
you please kindly read the poem for all of us?
Well, yes, Whale was published in Sahitya Academy Journal in 2018, which was September-October issue 2018. It is also anthologized, in the Kali project, Invoking the Goddess Within, that is published by Indie Blue this year. Now, okay, I'll read out the poem for you. The Whale. Let me in, now that father is dead. I'm still that frightened child peeping through the gap under your closed door, my cheeks touching your lifeless floor. I was scared of father, of his size. He was wise. His black framed square glasses, his seriousness, his office files that allowed no mistakes anywhere. I played with flies. My page full of mistakes was flung outside your closed door. There would be a lot of rustle, cooker whistle, in the kitchen, cuttings and beatings and fryings when he was home. I was the quiet, sneaking child, roaming in the kitchen garden, waiting for father to go. I was slow. I was scared of father, of his loud voice, his loud alcoholic friends, and when you whined and complained about me, of his abuses, of the cold floor outside your closed door. The lone hours of watching the moon, stiff from my bed, pretending sleep, kept me awake for nights. I could hear grandma's wheels, see her frights, see her lost daughter shine in the moonlight, a mist pale, pale and white. Her tears, like fairies with wings, escaped the house playing flutes. There was noise of boots. As father's alcoholic friends left the house, you drowsed in your siesta, while grandma and myself collected dumur from the forest nearby that smelled of Navkeshwar. Dumur that you so liked to cook, but the look that you gave me, the look, stayed with me for years, whether I made love or war. I did none of the things you thought I did. I was an obedient kid, but you whined and complained and I hid. I was a ghost. But now that father is dead, your footsteps, unsure and lean, let me in. That is the poem.
Uh, Such soulful ruminations of this child who is trying to really get herself after the this entire atmosphere of how the father leaves, and that And the very little images that you've used about these drunkard friends and how imbued with, again with nature, how nature comes alive and how he survives. Hmm. So, so we find that there's this late motive of a childhood. And is it that is this a conscious effort, Zinyadi, to go back to the childhood? Is it that you want to bring up certain specific memories? Would you please elaborate?
Well, I don't really know if childhood is a predominant theme in my poetry, uh, but it's feeling strange, to revisit the language of emotions, one's own emotions through the language of enquiry. I mean, to go back to my emotional responses to the incidents that I write in poetry and look at them through the eye of critic. But childhood occurs many times, I mean, not as a word, but the experiences I have gathered as a child. For I believe that we can never leave our childhood behind. We can never do that.
Yes. Childhood remains an inseparable part of our lives. So it can peep through any windows and doors whenever we are writing, or may
Mm,
not be even in writing, even in our uh,
yes.
minds and ruminations. Very true, Didi. There is also another poem, Darjeeling, which was published in Dista
Mm,
Journal, and it
yes.
was highly applauded and appreciated. It would be a great honor if you kindly recite Darjeeling for all of us. Please, Didi.
Well, since you say, as you said, many of my poems speak of Darjeeling and Tindharia, Sukna forest, because I am located, as I was talking of, I cannot write from anywhere else other than where I am and what I am. I write as a woman, a third world woman located in Siliguri, Darjeeling. So when I write the landscape, Tindharia, Sukna, Tista, even the tea gardens, they recur in my poems. And this landscape, as you were saying, is so beautiful that it itself is poetry. So we don't need actually poets to celebrate the landscape, but we write with the whole lands. When we write, the whole landscape is there in the mind. Especially, I'll talk about my university campus with its tall sal trees, the slowly setting sun, where I teach kids with blooming flowers, birds, and falling leaves. I cannot erase them out of my mind. They inevitably appear in my poetry, and well, I have this poem called Darjeeling. Darjeeling is only 78 kilometers from here, and it takes around 3 hours. And this is one of my favorite destinations. I've been many times to Darjeeling, and I have written this poem about Darjeeling. I have other poems also on Darjeeling, but I'll read out the poem that you want me to read out. It's titled Darjeeling. Between creases of sleep and wakeful states of years, the molten sunlight flits on Isku's leaves. Eternity breathes behind the other slope. Darjeeling exists in a dream. Pine trees shiver in green ferns. Their aging shoulders stoop, touch mine. Peace flags with Buddha's message flap colorful undertones in the wind. Kitchen fumes spiral upwards like affirmations of some hermetic faith. Each footstep replies to the other in boulevard silence. Chorbatos meander deep down into the unconscious. Memories swirl on tea garden gradients, yearning days, beggar nights, dim yellow bulbed love-makings. Cross the road to Oxford bookstore, like the penumbra of a kite's full wingspan. A whiff of horses' pungent smell. The gale eats into the flesh. Rain. I wrap a halfway dream in my woolen shawl, scrawl a name on a condensed window pane. That's the poem. Please unmute yourself. I can't.
Suddenly it got muted.
Yes.
So it's the whiff of the horses and the swirling memories, and Darjeeling being a wonderful place. So, it really invokes the best poet who has the flair of the pen, and your writing justifies everything about it.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to know that you read this poem and you like this poem.
And so Didi, you have been engaged in this Kali project
Mhm,
for quite some time.
mhm,
And Kali, as we all know,
mhm,
is one of the most important leitmotif in
mhm,
feminist literature.
mhm.
So, can you please throw some light that how do you want to really call yourself only as a feminist poet? Is it that you only vociferously advocate the issues of the feminism, or something or the other? I mean, do you really want to get yourself out of this panoramic uh, term of feminism? How do you want to cater your writings to? How do you really um want to get yourself to the readers?
It's not that I write slogans for feminism or something, but I was talking of being located. I I can discern myself. I can discern in me a feminist voice in my poetry. Uh, so if I talk of locating oneself, locating myself, yes, I cannot evade, the whole history of women's struggle, their sorrows, their challenges, their sacrifices that make up the psyche of a woman. But at the same time, it's not only that whenever I consciously write about feminism, I consciously write slogans about feminism. But when I write, the whole nature, the whole landscape, where I'm located, and also because as I was talking of, a third world woman poet, so it's part of me. It comes, it emerges in the poetry. It flows through my pen. So I cannot, delete or erase my woman, or if you call feminism, out of, I cannot leave that out. So, and if you say, if I label myself as a feminist, yes, I do. I do label myself as a feminist because I think feminism is not about misogyny, not about any lopsided development. It is an unbiased approach. We want the men to and women to come up, and we want a balanced society. We look forward to a good society. Maybe it's an utopian dream, but yes, of course, we are working towards it. It is an inclusive term, right?
Yes, and since, as you've been emphasizing on the fact that you've been working in a place which is a third world country, and how you have chartered your rise from being a school teacher and then to a university professor, it really shows that we can't, it shows two things. One, the way you have shaped your ideas, you have penned them down, and it also shows that you have nurtured the feminist self in you, the woman in you. And it is really inspiring for people like us who look up to you in hours of crisis as inspiration, that that is something invaluable.
Actually, Munami, I will say one thing here. I think every woman and every man, of course, is unique. Everyone is unique with their own struggles, with their own small challenges, and everybody negotiates or finds a way out of the crisis or adversaries. And of course, and woman, being a woman is something we should celebrate. It's good that we have women.
Yes, reasons to celebrate. 8th
It's
March is just,
yes.
we are still in the week of 8th March. And not only 8th March, but we should celebrate it every day, as you've just pointed out,
Yes.
Didi. And while taking a little bit of shift from the question of feminism, there was a poem which I love to read, and it gives me a sort of unique sense of solace. Trees are Buddhas. It's a special request on my part, and I would also like the audience to give a patient hearing to this wonderful poem. Please, Didi. Trees are Buddhas.
Okay. Trees are Buddhas. Yes. Um, I'll read out the poem for you.
Yes.
The trees are Buddhas. They stand wrapped in intense meditations together and make forests. When the melancholic winds break against their feet, they preach peace. They shed their memories like autumnal leaves. Born on the moist earth, the trees bloom fragrant flowers like love. Greener leaves sprout like sutras in spring to whisper truths. The seasons dance their melodies on the boughs, adorn them with new leaves, new fruits, then strip them away. The trees then lift the furrowed barks and yellowed leaves. Ripe, seedy fruits fall on the earth. Each seed is wooed to grow a tree. Spring arrives to fulfill them. The trees grow old secretly after every spring. They draw coded rings deep inside their trunks and wither away. Creatures of deep silence, they live the rhythm of the cosmos. We die many times in a lifetime like the trees, are renewed with every spring that comes our way. And after a season of fruits and flowers' burden, carrying our own floral memories, we die. The gust rolls the fallen leaves across forest floors. Bamboo flutes make somber music. The tall green trees silently embrace the seasons. We all are undeciphered rings in the end.
Really, this poem is more of remain reminds me, if whenever I go through this poem, that it it certainly lifts our soul up the way Buddha had achieved his nirvana, and the sutras, and how they are related, and how they can be as inseparable as the leaves to the trees. Didi, can you read another poem of your choice, which you would like all of us to hear? Is there any other short poem that you would like to go for?
Mm, I would like to, yes, I would like to read a poem called Love. It is titled Love. I think love connects all.
All of us, always, in all forms, variant forms.
Yes. So, love. I want to connect the places left by your songs. Before the light changes forever on the Indharya hills, something grew heavy in my throat those days. Looking over the monotonous gradient, talking of waking mountains, like the soggy droop of dark green pine leaves. Something grew light in my feet those days, like I could sprint across the Sukna forest slope, like I could leap up to touch the evening star, a trembling flow inside me like a canopied rivulet. Every time your eyes touched mine, a green solitude. I want to connect the spaces left by your touch, the old road, the bench, the trunk of the tree. Something grew definite in my eyes those days when my skin dissolved under your words and my eyes held out their hands to you. Floating above the weary fence, I choose this figurative life because love sometimes grows too heavy, like the idea of God, to carry literally.
Such well phrased poem, and canopied rivulet, the images itself. Uh, and solitude is something that breathes into us, and it's wonderful use of the small images that you connect while putting love as the central metaphor. Acha, Didi, is there any kind of a dark secret, or is there anything that you really want to purge out while writing uh, poems? Because we all know, as Aristotle has taught all of us in big or small ways, that literature, or especially poetry, it is a process of intellectual and subliminal purging. So, is there any kind of secret that you really want to share, or you want to purge out, or is there anything of that?
Mhm. Well, I will say that poetry is a space to share secrets. When we write poetry, we share the secrets loudly with the readers, with all the readers. The
Mm.
secrets sleep there between the lines to be awakened by the readers, I will say. Among many of my shortcomings, I will say, one is I would like to translate all my emotions on the pages, the whole of my emotions. But the words are not enough. So they are not enough to express ourselves fully. Life flows through the gaps of fingers and overflows our palms. We fail to communicate it fully. This is a limitation of language. And then I write in a language that is not my mother tongue. So once Samuel Beckett was asked why he wrote in English rather than in his mother tongue, in French. So he replied, the need to be ill equipped. So perhaps there remains this need to be ill equipped, seriously. So there remains the shortcomings. Then there is another flaw in me I would like to share for those who write poetry and with you, because you were asking about the secrets. Like when a line comes, then when poetry comes to me, I sometimes fail to write it down, and then they are lost. That way, I wrote many poems in my mind, and they just come, but I fail to catch them all. I have lost many of them. They are like butterflies or birds. So here I am, what I am, honestly, with all my flaws, and the secrets are there in the poetry. Anybody can read them.
Such a candid confession, and yes, flaws are there, and flaws make us beautiful and different from each other.
Yes.
So, is there any are there any particular poets that who inspire you to write?
Well, I read a lot of poetry actually. I read a variety of poets. I love Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore is very close to my heart. And then I love reading Jibanananda Das, Shakti Chattopadhyay. Joy Goswami is one of my favorites. Then, of course, Gulzar is there. Sachidanandan. I love reading Sachidanandan, Jayanta Mahapatra. Among English poets, I will name Keats, Wordsworth, Stephen Spender, Dylan Thomas. Then there is, of course, Sylvia Plath, Emily Dickinson, also Neruda. The list will actually go on if I talk about my favorite poets. So what I want to say here is, I like taking a poem and reading it during different times of a day, and that gives me a different to savor it differently. That gives me a different flavor. For instance, when I read Lorca, the city that does not sleep, in the sky there is nobody asleep, nobody is asleep. The creatures of the moon sniff and prowl about their cabins. When you read it in the morning, it'll give you one effect. When you read it late at night, after midnight, alone, you will have a different effect. So I like to take the poems that I love reading and read it through different times of the day. For instance, during the rainy season, during the monsoons, I would love to spend a day with Shruti Chattopadhyay. So it's like that. There are so many poets and they write so good poetry.
Truly so. For a poet like you, it's very difficult to zero down to one single poet. It has to have one basket full of flowers with myriad colors and flavors for us. Very true. Didi, can
But
you?
I'll say, but I'll say nature poets, appeal to me. Nature poems in general, they have a special appeal for me. Yes.
Absolutely, that is very evident in your poem. And since you are in Darjeeling, and I also started my career from Shukna,
Oh,
DPS. So it's a wonderful place, and
yes.
it really brings out the poet if one wants to write.
Mm.
Uh, Didi, can you share some of your newly composed poems which have not been published yet? Will you like us to be the first audience for those poems?
Okay.
One or two, will you please share with
I
us?
have I have written a poem for this International Women's Day, keeping this International Women's Day in mind. It has not been published,
Hmm.
and I haven't named it yet.
Hmm.
I've just written the poem, so I will call it the unnamed.
Hmm.
Unnamed.
Unnamed. Okay.
And since this
Let
time,
it remain as unnamed. It is the
okay,
best title.
okay,
Let it
okay,
go like that.
I'll take your
Right?
suggestion.
Hmm.
And this time the UN theme was hashtag choose to challenge. I think you know that. UN campaign theme for International Women's Day was hashtag choose to challenge. So
Hmm.
keeping that in mind, I composed a poem, unnamed. Parched earth heart, barbed wire skin, fence, fence, defense, rude, loud abuse, shout, night out, fence, fence, defense, bruise, burn, cut, I break apart, fence, fence, offense, I break fence, rock steps up, barefoot, green root, soft folds of fern, it's my turn, I scale sky, I will fly.
So nothing can be as good as this. I scale sky and I will fly. So we will always fly and have great ideas with us. And is there any other poem that you would like to share with us?
Well, yes, I would like to, since you were talking about, how why do I write feminism, how is feminism flowing through my pens? I would like to read out one poem. Uh, I was invited at a Sahitya Academy program where Tilotama Mojumdar had read out a short story. The story affected me so much that I kept thinking about it until I penned this poem. This was originally titled Reading Tilottama's Story, but it was later published in Pangolin Review as On Reading Her Story. Okay. So here we go. On Reading Her Story. She stood at the crossroads of a life for him. She stood there, denuded of the poundage of her everyday. He had asked her to leave her baggage behind, promised her that they would start afresh, that he would always be there for her. She lugged the weight of the moments she couldn't have left behind. All the raindrops on her leaves, all his poems they would read aloud, all the coffee bills they could laugh at, all her fresh ferns, spear grass, train tickets, and egret feathers, a small water bottle, some money, lipstick, and comb, also memories of scratches on her dry barks, yellow leaves that had collected at her feet. In short, her bare essentials and a part of Sukna forest range. She waited for him there, through all the droplets of water that formed in the mouth of taps fell one by one. She waited for him there until she was hungry and not hungry anymore. She waited for him there until the last train left the platform, until the bodies around wrapped blankets turned dead on the benches, until she was unburdened of all the tearing noises the world makes, until it was time to return home, until it was time to return home.
Truly so, until it was time to return home. We are always trying to return to our home, which we might have left, which we sometimes, it's very difficult sometimes to return home. I too feel that because the home that we've been brought up, the home that we've been reared and we grow up, might change the color of its walls with time. We don't know. It's a wonderful line that I would like to come to an end to this program, which which seems to have no ending. Thank you very much, Professor Zinia
Thank
Mitra,
you.
for being with us, for sharing your thoughts, for reading your poems, and for taking us to a world where we still believe that there is hope. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you,
very much,
Monami.
Policy Times.
Thank you, Monami, for having me, and thanks to Policy Times. Thank you so much. I feel